Okay, this is an introduction to the PR for the Android scaffold code. So basically, I took the POC code, I stripped out the functionality. We're going to add that back in with tests, etc. And then I did some refactoring so that it's the goal here is that all the Android code is decoupled from the existing Fleet code, specifically existing data store and service code. There is definitely some still coupling through the Fleet package, which we may want to clean up eventually. And also migrations are separate. So the intention is for the Android tables to not be coupled to the other tables in the database. So any sort of coupling that needs to be done in terms of like deleting entries, related entries, etc., has to be done through the application. All right, let's go through the files. So I'm adding another schema. So this is for the test schema, right? So we want to run our Android tests, load up the Android schema for the database tests, which the schema is going to be significantly smaller than the main schema. So improvement there in runtime. This is some migration code. This just has been refactored into its own methods down here. This is the Android stuff down here. This is the part of the refactoring. Next one, serve go, similar stuff here. This has been pulled out in its own methods so that we can add the Android stuff here. This looks like, not sure why, I guess these lines were long. Not sure why these formatting changes are in here. I mean, these lines are pretty long, so I think I have them set to like 130 characters maybe. It's just this file that got affected. I'm not sure exactly why. New service are created. We'll see the main code later. This is just breaking up the line here. Okay, we'll get to this later, but effectively we are still using one main API handler, and inside I'm basically adding in the routes. So that's how it works. I think once we get to an integration test for Android service only, I think it'll work. I'll need to make the code to make the integration test work without having to build the entire the main service handler. Just line changes here. This is the refactoring code. I mean, none of the other files I think have line changes. That's just this one. I am keeping track of some to-dos back in this issue, in this subtask. Nothing special here. Just these are likely to change as we actually put the real logic in here. Okay, this is an important part of this decoupling procedure. Is I'm adding an architecture test to make sure that any packages. Any Android packages are explicitly not dependent on, I'm just calling out the big ones here, on the server service and the server data store. And these are some ignores, so right, so I'm ignoring these ones. But you see these ... so this is expanding anything under here as well. So earlier I mentioned that we're still dependent on Fleet, the Fleet package, and this is part of that. Is that that Fleet package is also dependent on Jira and Zendesk. Something to look into. I think it's a little trickier to break up that dependency, but something I'm thinking about. Yeah, so it has its own data store interface. It's got the migration methods. These might be redone, but I have them in here because I just left them in here because I had some tests for these. Its own migration status and migration status codes. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this. Basically, we do want to interface with the main data store. And I don't know if I need an interface. I could use the main data store interface, but we do have a pattern where we are defining specific interfaces for subsets of the data store interface. So this might be useful for testing. So here's an example of, a MySQL enterprise, just pretty much similar code to what we have in our main fleet data store. Nothing too special here, just create, get, update, list methods here, and then we have the tests. Write this method, create my MySQL data store. It only pulls in the Android schema, right? So it's only pulling in that smaller schema and does the tests on that schema. This is a little bit of duplication, but it's not much. It's just this not found error. I think it's fine. It's not that much code. Example migrations, same as we have before. I just create the Android enterprises table here. This might change. I think eventually once the migration is like ready to actually be used, I'll update the timestamp just to make sure that people are not stuck with outdated tables. This is a placeholder. I just left it in here just to make sure the tests run, but this test doesn't really do much except apply the migrations. This is largely a copy from the main migrations, migration client based on Goose. Migration tests, also mostly copy, nothing big here. Creating the data store. So effectively the primary replica come from the main data store. So it's kind of like a child data store. We have some migration related stuff in here. I mean, this is mostly the same as the main data store. The schema, Android schema, currently there's just two tables, enterprises and migration status. So I did pull out the testing utils in their own package because I didn't want them to be part of the production code that we compile. So I pulled them out. Basically, connect to the database. Standard stuff here. Nothing too special here. Pretty standard, except it's a separate package, so some of these have to be public. Android service, just some placeholders here. Endpoint utils, so this is to create the handler routes, handler function. It just returns an error, so I don't have this error comma error pattern that the main one has. I think that'll work fine. I do have a custom encode response. It looks for error and statuser so far. So it's, I stripped out some code that wasn't needed at this moment here. Statuser and error interfaces here. Make decoder also custom, but it has been refactored to reuse some code. Right, so by default, we come in here and we unzip it, and then we decode, we use JSON decoder. Then we go and do the URL tags. And so there was like custom code specific to like list options, etc. That's not here right now. maybe it will not need to be here. But this is some common code that was pulled out that's shared between this decoder and the main decoder, and then the decoding the query tag, also common code that was pulled out. Auth endpointer, it has similar to the one in the main code, but it has a fewer things. All the endpoints largely has to be separate at this point because of this change, because it's a different signature, because we just have error, we don't have that comma error. And this is actually a simple fix, which we may try to do in the main code. Path handler to handle the versions and stuff. And this is where that code is, right? So we have to return error and error, but in this case, I always return nil as the error. So this is how I'm getting rid of that extra error. So the handler looks pretty simple. This is so serve.go calls this get routes and passes the router, the main router, and we simply just attach our routes to that router. And so this handler is a pretty small file. Service go. Android management. This will be pulled out into its own proxy struct. And these are kind of empty here. You know, they just all return errors. Not implemented, not implemented. Okay, so arch test. Remember I said the architecture test, so this is where that code is. It's based on this guy's code. Largely the same. I renamed a few things, I reformatted, but pretty similar. I think I did speed it up a little bit. Make sure it ignores itself. Yeah, I added this regex check to only check like the fleet packages. Otherwise, it would just check all the packages, and it was taking like 15 seconds. Now it takes like 1 second. I mean, this is basically that code, and most of the tests are the same. I mean, all the tests are the same. I think I'm missing like one function. I forgot what it was, but most of the code is the same. And this is the test for that arc test. And then some test files for that arc tests. Some dummy packages with dependencies to test different use cases for dependency checking. Common migration code got pulled out. Compare versions, unknown unknowns, get versions for migration, and compare versions test got pulled out. So this is how we make the Android data store. We just pass it the logger, primary, and replica from the main data store. So it's kind of a child of the main data store. A lot of this code just changing compare versions to common MySQL compare versions. So this is where it got moved from. This is a check I added because I ran into this. I'm going to remove this. Let me make a note. I had a schedule on my POC that's no longer here. Just a lot of private stuff moving into a common public, a common package. Common package, another to do, common package, refactoring this out. This is endpoint utils. So refactoring this into a common endpoint utils. This is what I was mentioning before. Yeah, I move this out. Now it's this decode URL tag. Move this out. Now it's decode query tag value. Just making things public here. Also move this out to a common place. Same thing, move this to a common place. Move, renaming. Yeah, so this is where it comes in. So is this the handler? Yeah, this is how the main handler now happens. I pass in that route function, and then if it sees that there's a route function, it passes in and just calls it to attach additional routes. Made this public, also in retrospect, probably didn't need to. Code error, see, this is that public IP. It basically just got moved effectively. Just renaming things. This is common code, parse tag, field pair, all fields, bad errors, uint, int, and string from request, decode URL tag value, that's decode query tag value, extract IP, and error handler. And then errors got moved to a common place, so that way I could call encode error from the new service, new Android service. So this is all the same. I could have modified it, but it seemed like, error code can be shared. There's no significant reason why it needs to be different. Even though, this one has OS query error that Android's not going to have, but, it's only relevant if there's errors. The test. Okay, this is just a test. Renaming, moving those errors to the buff file, renaming, moving to that common transport error file, renaming. This is where I pass in that extra function for extra routes for Android. It's only currently being used in serve.go. Renaming, moving. Yeah, this whole transport error got moved out except for this little piece. Renaming. This is just a tool I've been using just to call these API endpoints from the command line. So not part of the main server, and the schema generator to generate schema.sql. It's largely a copy. The main difference, it uses Android migration status as opposed to migration status. And that's it.